A little bit talking about the seals. And once again, I'll put this in front of you, which I'll probably do quite a bit. Uh, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, right? The last seal introduces the trumpets. The last trumpet introduces the bowls. We looked at the 4 seals, the 4 horses of the apocalypse, as we call them, last Sunday night. And we talked about those 4 horses being Christ going out in the gospel. We talked about the persecution of the saints. We talked about the discrimination in labor and business, which added to the suffering of Christians. And we talked about the judgments that fell upon society as a result of rejecting the divine message. So these 4 horses that go out, that have gone out into the earth, and they've revealed to us these things. So we get to the 5th seal. The 5th seal is maybe one of the most interesting seals in the Bible. It's the souls of the slain. If you... on the bottom of Revelation chapter 6. It's the souls of the slain underneath the altar. A lot of times we think of heaven. What is heaven like? What is in heaven? Are we conscious in heaven? Are we asleep when we die? If you really take the vision of John in Revelation, you kind of get the idea there's a lot going on in heaven. Not just everybody sleeping, not just resting, but even now, there's things going on. In the times of John, there were things going on in heaven. The souls of the slain are those martyred for Jesus Christ. In Revelation 6:11, it says, "There was given to each them a white robe, and they were told they should rest for a while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also." So they were told to rest. They were told these are the martyrs, those who were slain. And there's controversy about if those are souls slain since Christ, those slain under Rome. I would think we're talking about Rome. We're talking about that persecution. To me, it would be those souls slain under Roman rule, which were a lot. And there's going to be a lot more. If we're at the end of the 1st century, it's going to be the 3rd century, 300 AD, right in there, 325 or 315 before Constantine's going to recognize Christianity as the state church of Rome. So there's a couple of 100 years left of Roman persecution that's going to get more and more severe as time goes on. So we're not at the end of Rome's persecution. We're in the middle of it or at the beginning of it. So there's going to be more. How long? A little while. Well, you know, in John 7:33, it says, "A little while I'm with you," Jesus says. So a little while means a little while. What's a little while in the face of eternity? Well, I don't know, but I don't think that it's looking at it in the face of eternity. I think it's right, and John's writing to us in what we understand. A little while, John 12:23, a little while is the light among you, the same terminology. So these are the souls that are slain, that will be slain because of their testimony of Jesus. The martyrs, the ones who would be crucified, beheaded, the ones that will be fed to wild animals, the ones that are going to die because of Jesus Christ. They're given white robes. They're underneath the altar. Where's the altar? The altar is always in the throne room of God. So that's in the throne room of God. They're underneath the altar, dressed in white. How long? How long? They're very interesting. The souls, disembodied, right? There's no body until the resurrection. And so it's the disembodied souls. As we look at the 6th seal, it's judgment. Is it the final judgment? No. Why not? Well, there's clues in it. I looked when I broke the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth. The fig tree cast its unripe fruits when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their place. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders of the rich, and the strong, and every slave, free man, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, "Fall on us, hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?" A lot of people think, well, that's the end. You know, that sounds so bad. Sky turning dark, stars falling from the sky being rolled up like a scroll. That sounds like the end to me. Sound like the end to you? But it's not. How do we know? Well, for one thing, even though this sounds terrible and awful, there's nothing new here. These are things we see in the Old Testament over and over again, and even in the New Testament. The idea of destruction, earthquake, sky turning black, moon turning dark, stars falling from the sky, scroll being rolled up. Every time we see that in the Bible, be that in Isaiah or Ezekiel or any other place we see it in the Bible, it talks about one thing: the end of a nation, the end of rule, the end of something. So it doesn't mean, like we might say, it's a figurative book. So you can't go to this part of it after we've been saying, oh, this is apocalyptic language. This is language we have to say. What does it say? What does it mean? Like when you and I go out and it's raining, we say, it's raining cats and dogs. Do you expect to go out and see cats and dogs falling from the sky? Well, the truth is, if you've never heard that expression and maybe never seen rain, you might really expect to see that if that's what somebody told you, right? If they said, it's raining cats and dogs, and you heard it hitting the building, you never saw that before in your life, you never heard that expression, you might literally want to go out and see cats and dogs falling from the sky. But we would understand that would be silly, right? Well, let's understand something. These people understood this a lot more than you and me do. And to them, what's said here and what's meant here makes a lot more sense to them than it does to us. But it can make sense to us because we know from the Old Testament, when we talk about especially constellations falling, stars falling from the sky, constellations turning dark, scroll being rolled up, that's the end of a nation, earthquakes, judgment of God. All these things are symbolic. What does it say? What does it mean? Why do we know it's not the end? For one thing, we're not to the end of the book. There's a lot more to go. If this was the final judgment, why go on? It's not the final judgment. The other thing is it says when Jesus talks in Matthew, where he says, flee to the mountains, hide yourself. If it's the final judgment, what good is it going to be to go hide yourself in a cave or flee to a mountain? It's not going to help you any. The end's the end, right? Running's not going to help in the end. But here it says they're going to run, they're going to hide, they're going to flee from this judgment that's to come. So once again, we begin to get a picture that this isn't the end. In Isaiah 12:22, the destruction of Judah is portrayed as an earthquake, but it wasn't a little earthquake. It just meant that was the destruction of Jerusalem. An earthquake in the Bible is judgment of God. You have to go back to the judgment of Korah in the Old Testament, when Korah rose up and challenged Moses being the spiritual leader of Israel. And God put judgment upon them. There was an earthquake and it swallowed them up. When they built the golden calf and Moses came down from the mountain, there was an earthquake and it swallowed them up. The earthquake is the judgment of God. Doesn't mean literally there's an earthquake here. It's God's judgment. So you and I have to ask ourselves always as we read this, what does it say? What does it mean? In Isaiah 13, the fall of Babylon, the sun was darkened, the moon and stars ceased to shine. That never actually happened. The sun was never darkened, and the moon and stars never ceased to shine. But Babylon fell. The fall of Babylon was portrayed by this. The sun was darkened, the moon and stars ceased to shine. So what does it say? What does it mean? Well, Rex, how do you know that? Because I can go back in the Old Testament and I can say, here's exactly the same thing, exactly the same wording. We're talking about the fall of Babylon. So when we get to this wording in Revelation, we're talking about the fall of Rome. Not literally talking about this happening. We really have a problem with this book when we begin to put a literal interpretation upon the symbolic things that's said here. To them, they knew the Old Testament. Unfortunately, a lot of people, when they go to the book of Revelation, they really don't know the Old Testament. So they look at the book of Revelation like this is new. These wording is new. This is something new. When the truth is, the wording of the book of Revelation, apocalyptic language of the book of Revelation, is ancient, from long ago. So we say Isaiah, the fall of Edom, in Isaiah 34:4. We know what this is about, this prophecy of Isaiah 34:4. It's about the fall of the nation of Edom. Edom was the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, that was always the enemies of Israel. And when Isaiah prophesied about that nation falling, which that nation did fall, he says heaven was being rolled up like a scroll. So if you take something like that nation and you roll that up, it means it's finished. It's done. You finished with them. What does it say? What does it mean? When it rolls up, it will be finished. In Hosea chapter 10, verse 8, in the fall of Samaria, it says the mountains to fall on them. Mountains didn't literally fall on them, but that's what the symbolization was of the fall of that nation. So when we see these things, it scares us because we think, boy, that's just terrible. I just can't imagine the moon turning to blood, the stars ceasing to shine, stars falling from the sky. That sounds like the end to me. But when we look back at these Old Testament examples and see this in the Bibles happen many times, figuratively, then here it's happening figuratively. And we're talking about the fall of a nation. We're not talking about the end. In Joel 2, 28 through 32, the end of the Jewish nation, it says the sun being darkened and the moon turning to blood. So once again, that wasn't the end. It was symbolic. When the Jewish nation fell, which the Jewish nation has fallen, when Jesus Christ came, the destruction of Jerusalem, the Jewish nation has fallen. He says that the sun would be darkened and the moon would turn to blood. So, like I say, it sounds scary. We go back to this Old Testament. Each figurative statement is a direct quotation from the Old Testament. It's a direct quote from Old Testament scripture that's brought up to say, this is the destruction, this is the end of Rome, this is the end of this empire. So when you look at this, people say, oh, that scares me. Well, if you really think literally that's what's going to be, that's kind of scary. But when you understand it's figurative, like cats and dogs, that it makes a little more sense, right? And it's not quite as scary as it was because we're talking here about that. Judah, Edom, Babylon, the Jewish nation, all these nations that fell, these exact terminology was used for their fall. Yet none of this literally ever happened. It was figurative. It was figurative, okay? And we use figurative language all the time, don't we? I'm starving to death, right? Are you literally starving to death? Or are you going to die if you don't eat, right? You know, we say this all the time, right? I say, I'm so hungry, my stomach thinks my throat's been cut. Well, you know, my stomach really doesn't think anything, but that's just, you know, that's just a term. And we say things like that. We say things like that all the time. And maybe more than we even realize it, we use these statements that mean something to us, but to somebody that's never heard it before, it'd be like, oh my, what's he talking about? What's he saying? So we have to say, once again, what does it say? What does it mean? Between every one of these bowls or seals and bowls, or seals and trumpets, there's an interlude. There's a period of peace, a period of calm. And in that time between the opening of the sixth and the seventh seal, we have a break. So what happens in the break? Well, for one thing, we're going to mark the good and the bad. And we need to talk about that a little bit. And I'm not rushing, so we might not finish, because I'm going to quit here in a few minutes. So I'm not going to rush. Revelation chapter 7 is the interlude. After this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth or on the sea or any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living God, and he cried out with a loud voice to the four angels, to whom it was granted to them, the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. So we're going to have a minute of peace. Four winds, four angels, four corners, four in the Bible always represents totality of the earth. Ezekiel saw the living creatures, four wheels that could go any of four directions. Wind, breath in the Bible always means presence of God, power of God. Over and over. Ezekiel, when Elijah hid from God in the mountain and the Lord was a gentle breeze. The word spirit in the Bible is the same word for wind, pneuma in the Greek. We get our word pneumonia from that. It means soul, spirit, wind, breath. All those things have to do biblically with God's power. When you talk about wind, when you talk about the idea of that, it's God's control over the earth, God's control over things that are physical. And wind always represents that in the Bible. Even when Moses crossed the sea, it was the wind that blew and dried the land for the Israelites to cross over. So over and over in the Bible, when we see wind, we see that idea of God's power, God's action. And so they're holding it back. If the wind is the power of God, the wind is God's action, then the angels holding that back are holding back God's action on the earth, allowing this period of interlude so that the good can be marked. And we're going to talk about that because there's a lot of discussion about what that means. In Jeremiah 49, it says, I will bring against Elam the four winds and the four quarters of the heavens, and will scatter them to the four winds, and there will not be a nation where Elam's exiles do not go. So once again, you see in the Old Testament, wind is power. Wind is God's action. It's doing something. And that's the reason the word spirit in the Bible is that same word, because spirit is wind. When Jesus, I think it's really fascinating, when Jesus had his apostles at the end and he breathed on them the Spirit, right? He pneuma them. Right? I always thought that's kind of funny, because it's kind of a play on words, because breath is pneuma and spirit's pneuma, so he pneuma them, right? He breathed on them the Spirit. And I always thought that there's a play on words. Jesus was it's kind of that interesting thing, the idea of wind, of breath, of spirit, of movement. What's wind do? Wind's force, wind's power. Wind causes things to happen. Jesus uses that even when he talks to Nicodemus, and he says, you don't see where the wind goes or where it comes from, yet you know it blows because you see what it does. Wind is the power of God. And so when we hold it back, we're holding back God's power. When we let it go, God's power is being loosed upon things. If you remember when Elijah, the wind coming, actually tore the rocks in two. So wind is God's power. I want to talk a little bit before we close tonight. I want to kind of end with this about this sealing, because I think that's something that we hear a lot about. We've heard so much about from the book of Revelation. What's the mark of God, right? We talk about the mark of God, the mark of the beast, sealing people on their forehead. And, all my life I've heard all these things. Social security numbers were that, maybe it's your IP address now, I don't know, all these things that are the mark of the beast are God's sealing, or the mark that God's put. But once again, what does it say? What does it mean? And I think in order for us to understand this, we have to look at an Old Testament book, Ezekiel chapter 9. In Ezekiel 9, it says, I heard him call out in a loud voice, bring the guards of the city here, each with a weapon in his hand. And I saw 6 men coming from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with a deadly weapon. With him was a man clothed in linen, who had a writing kit at his side. And this is Ezekiel's vision, okay? This isn't literally happening. This is Ezekiel's vision, like John's vision. It's a vision, okay? And he said, they came and stood beside the bronze altar, and the glory of the God of Israel went up above the cherubim where it had been and moved to the threshold of the temple. And the Lord called to the man clothed in linen who had a writing kit at his side and said to him, go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all the detestable things that are done in it. And as I listened, he said to the others, follow him through the city and kill without showing pity or compassion. Slaughter old men, young men, and maidens, women and children, but do not touch anyone who has the mark. Begin at my sanctuary. So they began with the elders who were in the front of the temple. And he said to him, defile the temple and fill the courts with the slain. Go. So they went out and began killing throughout the city, and they were killing, and I was left alone, and I fell face down, crying out, O sovereign Lord, are you going to destroy the entire remnant of Israel in this outpouring of your wrath on Jerusalem? This is prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. I guess I should give context. And so the Babylonians are going to come in and destroy Jerusalem. They're going to kill all these people. They're going to carry them off to Babylon. And this is Ezekiel's vision. Ezekiel's like, are they going to kill everybody in Jerusalem? And the God's saying, no, because I'm going to mark some of them. Some of them are going to be here. The ones who lament over the tragedy and the sin of the city, I'm going to mark them. I'm going to save them. So he sends this man in linen out to mark him, and he sends these others out to kill. These would be the Babylonians that are coming out to kill. And he said, he answered me, the sin of the house of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great, and the land is full of bloodshed, and the city is full of injustice. They say the Lord has forsaken the land, the Lord does not see. So I will not look on them with pity or spare them, but I will bring them down on their own heads what they have done. Then the man in linen with the writing kit at his side brought back word, saying, I've done as you commanded. Once again, old stuff, Ezekiel, Old Testament. This is 500 years before Jesus, okay? And he says, go out and mark them. Did the man literally go out and mark those people on their foreheads? No, he did not. But he marked them in God's eyes. What does it mean? He marked them, and they weren't destroyed because they had the mark of the Lord on them. But did that mean that man with the writing kit went out and literally put a mark on them? No, he never did that. It's figurative. And that's exactly what it is in the book of Revelation. We talk about marking things, marking people. It's figurative. You're marked, whether you know it or not. You're marked as a child of God. You're sealed with the Holy Spirit. You're marked as a child of God, whether you know that or not. So here he comes out, and he's going to mark these 144,000 people, okay? He's going to say, these people are my people. Does that mean none of them are going to die? I don't believe that means that. I think some of these 144,000 will die. The question becomes, who are the 144,000? Well, you're going to have to wait till next Sunday night to find that out, because I don't have time to explain that to you tonight. So if there's any way that we can do any service to you, won't you let it be known while we stand and sing?